It's time to get sexy, so watch Secular Sexuality Live Thursdays at 7 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTSS and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callsex.
Welcome to Talk Heathen, the show where we want to know what you believe and why. Please call in. It's a call-in show and we'd love to talk to you. We still have open lines, so the number is just below. And get calling. We'd love to chat to you about any of your beliefs, anything. If you believe in a god, maybe you believe in spirits, maybe you believe in astrology. Maybe you're one of these people I've been arguing with all week who believes that being trans is a religion, and you can tell me why that's the case. We'd love to hear from you. So my name is Katy Montgomerie, and I'm your host this week, and I'm joined by the amazing MD Aware. Hi.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
How are you doing? No problem. Thanks for coming on Talk Heathen. Just so everyone knows, Talk Heathen is a product of the Atheist community of Austin, and it is a 501c3 organization dedicated to the promotion of positive atheist culture, which is great. Everyone loves atheist culture. There's loads of it. And the separation of religion and government, which is a very important cause. And the ACA is a great organization, and they need your support. So if you would like to support the show and the ACA, then there's lots of different ways you can do it, which we'll mention throughout the show. One great way is just below the video, there is a button you can click join, and you can become a member on YouTube, which is great because then you get custom chat icons, you get all the super stickers and all that kind of stuff. And you'll be immune to the chat frequency limits, which means that you can spam the chat. Don't spam the chat unless it's just, celebrating how great I am. You can spam that as much as you like. Or MD Aware, of course, definitely. And you can also support the show on Patreon if you go to tiny.cc/Patreon th. So the link should be just below. Welcome to the show, everyone. I think this is exciting. I don't know if anyone saw MD Aware on Truth Wanted the other day, but this is his second show, so this is exciting.
It's very exciting.
How are you feeling? How's your week been?
It's good. It's been good. I've been trolling through the YouTube comments, even though I told myself I wouldn't, because it's usually a recipe for tears. But I think the feedback's been mixed to positive. So
that's good.
Yeah, I mean,
I think it's disappointing when you read through the comments and you don't get some troll negative one telling you you're ugly or stupid or something.
I know. I was frankly bracing myself for much worse, but it's been okay. So either that means that nobody's heard it or no one's had a problem with it.
So what that means is we need the most abusive comments for MD Aware today in the chat below. No, don't do that. Don't do that. Please leave lovely comments. It's good to get feedback. I think, I can only speak for myself, but I like it when there is constructive feedback about the show and stuff and about me. So you're always welcome to leave that. And it sounds like MD Aware is also up for that kind of thing.
Yes, I love constructive feedback.
Yeah, it's always good to have because, well, I don't know, you can just kind of get stuck in a rut of just doing the same mistakes over and over again. Otherwise, if someone doesn't come along and tell you. So just a reminder to everyone, please do call in. We'd love to talk to you. We still have some open lines. But before we get on to calls, I wanted to ask about, so we were talking just before the show about what you do, because obviously your name is MD Aware, and that means you're some kind of doctor, one of these doctor people. And apparently you shoot tumors with lasers, like some kind of cancer robot or something. This is most sci-fi thing. What is this?
Okay, so I'm doing my PhD. So I have an MD. I'm in general surgery. I'm like training to be a general surgeon, so I'm a resident like Grey's Anatomy first season or whatever, right? But I'm doing my PhD right now in cancer nanomedicine, which means that I am working on treating cancer with like new technology. And so the main thing that I do right now is something called photodynamic therapy. And basically I inject a nanomedicine, so a nanoparticle, and it accumulates in tumors. And then I shoot the tumors with a laser, and the laser activates the nanoparticle and creates reactive oxygen species or like oxygen-free radicals. And those destroy the tumor. So my the real point of all this is that I'm trying to like find a way to destroy tumors in a very non-invasive and controlled way without damaging anything else, which is the big challenge right now in a lot of cancer surgery.
Yeah, I mean, I think that just sounds so cool. It's funny because just like before we're discussing, I was like, oh, what do you do? And I was like, can I ask you about this? And you're like, yeah, it's kind of boring though, isn't it? I was like, you're shooting tumors with lasers, mate. What are you on about?
I mean, so this is the thing,
sci-fi.
right? It's I agree. It sounds very sci-fi and cool, but like when you do it every day, you're like, well, it's a little bit humdrum, you know. You were like, oh yeah, it's just another Monday. I'm like, well, literally, it is just sort of another Monday.
I think this is the like, I mean, I don't know how you see it, but I always feel like it's a bit like the standing on the shoulders of giants thing. But you're standing on so many shoulders, you can't really see all the way down. You just see a couple of people below you, and because it's similar with me, like, you know, I'm creating some code or whatever, and it's going to be turned into these like transistors which are nanometers across, which you know, the frequency is just like a crazy amount, sends all these ones and zeros for all this stuff, and it allows people to talk to each other on the other side of the world. And you're just like, yeah, it's just Monday, isn't it? Though. So.
Yeah, exactly. It's you lose perspective on what you're doing sometimes, and it takes an outsider to be like, oh wow, that's so cool, before you sort of realize.
Yeah, it's definitely talking to an outsider, and sometimes you can just take a step back. Or I always try and find like the coolest way to describe it, and also the most mundane way to describe it, depending on, because sometimes you get in a party and someone's like, what do you do? And you feel like, oh, this, you know, I'm feeling the vibe and these people seem like they could be interested, and you can be like, I shoot tumors with lasers, and everyone's going to be like, oh, that's so cool. Or you've got it, or if, you know, someone asks you and you're like, oh, they're going to ask me loads of questions I just can't be asked. You want to be like, oh, I inject a, you know, a light sensitive particle into the body and it searches for like problem, and then people just switch off, and then you can just talk about something else.
Maybe that's what I'm doing. Maybe I just maybe I'm just sick of thinking about my thesis, and I just want
I mean, so I never did a PhD thesis, but I did like a dissertation for my degree, and I was so sick of that. And that's like my cool way of explaining that is I was using robots to program how plants grow, like the shape they grow in. And that sounds quite cool. But at the stage where I was doing it, people were like, oh, what's your project on? I'm like, I'm growing fucking runner bean plants, and I'm getting so angry I'm throwing them out the window. Like, oh, they're the worst plants. I still have a vendetta against runner bean plants, but you can describe it in a cool way. So
yeah, it's true. You know, I worked in a plant genetics lab. My very first lab that I worked in was plant genetics, and I was just like growing moss. Moss in a petri dish, and then like grinding it up and getting its DNA. Like, this is not exactly what I thought it would be.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But like plant genetics lab, like that sounds really cool. And that's just like a garden shed just with a damp floor that scraped the moss off or something.
Yeah. Science fiction does a lot of heavy lifting on the PR side of like actual scientific work, you know?
Yeah, definitely. But you know, still, it is cool, and it's life-saving, I guess, making a difference. So
hopefully it's life-saving.
But talking about life-saving, just before we get on to like maybe we can move on to some calls. I think that we just asked another like life or death question here, which I think is very important, which is your position on mayonnaise. Are you like a normal human who believes in the freedom and truth of all sandwiches in the future, like me, who's obviously anti-mayonnaise, or are you slime? It's important.
I'm open to the concept of mayonnaise, I've
Show's
yet to
cancelled, guys.
find a very worthy mayonnaise for some of the best sandwiches.
I mean, why would you put? I'm speechless. Putting mayonnaise in bad sandwiches is like that's still a crime against humanity. But putting them in good sandwiches, then you're like causing so much more pain and suffering. It's sad to know that you're a mayonnaise apologist. Like when you meet these rational people, you're like, no, I was a rational skeptic. Like, so exciting. We can have all these intellectual conversations. And then you find out they're like a racist or a misogynist or a homophobe or something. It's like, oh, they're a mayonnaise apologist.
Wow.
Anyway.
What a bucket to be put in.
Perhaps we should move on to calls before I get into some kind of ranty frenzy.
Yeah,
Are you ready for some calls?
Absolutely.
Wicked. So our first caller today is Logical Apostate in Missouri. And they want to understand trans rights and how they impact or are impacted by religion. Hello. Does that sum up your position? What's the question you'd like to ask?
Specifically, it's easy for me to intellectualize as a cis male, a white male, what it might be like as a trans woman, being around religion. Well, I don't want to say constantly, but certainly consistently being confronted as you are doing what you're doing. I just want to understand in the best way that I can, like, no woman could tell me what it's like to be pregnant because I'm a man and I can't get that. But I would really love to hear just like what your experience is. And maybe the last thing I would want to know would be how can I perhaps improve that experience for those around me. Just again, as a guy who completely understands I can't really get it.
Right. Yeah, I think like a question that people often ask me about trans stuff is like, they're trying to be polite and they're just like, I don't really get it. And maybe they might say that because I'm like a binary trans woman, as in, like I was born and they said, oh, it's a boy, and now I say it's, I'm a woman. And there are like non-binary people, and there's all kinds. Oh, sorry, gosh, my cat's just pulled my headphones out. 1 second, I'm very sorry. And anyway, we're back. People might say, well, maybe I get you, but I don't really get these other things. And I think, people can be worried to say that, but I also think that's kind of fine. If you don't get it, like you say, you don't get pregnancy. I will never know what it's like to be pregnant either, but that doesn't mean I can't fully support people who are pregnant and listen to their experiences and understand what their struggles are and, support them. So, and I guess you can do the same with trans people. You can do your best to try and understand it, but it might be that you never get it. I mean, to be honest, I don't really get why anyone wants to be a man. So I think that's, I think it's a fair trade. But I think in how it like impacts of religion, I think in the UK, it's not maybe as bad as it is in some places. For example, in the USA, where religion can be the sort of dominating political factor in sort of big macro scale politics, but also in sort of interpersonal relationships. I do think that there are a lot of Christians in the USA and in the UK and in Canada who are, perfectly reasonable and capable of being pro-LGBT rights. There are lots of Christians who are supportive of gay rights, and trans rights is kind of, in one sense, more of the same. I mean, it's a lot more complicated than that. But I think once you can get your head around this idea, if there's people in your religion saying, oh, well, actually it says in the Bible all gay people are bad, and you're like, oh, well, yeah, but the general message is love, and I'm kind of ignoring that, and I know these gay people and they're very religious too, and it's all fine, then to sort of expand that to trans people isn't much of a step, especially when trans people aren't actually mentioned in the Bible. I don't think they're mentioned in any holy book, at least to my knowledge. If anyone in the comments or in the chat or ever wants to let me know if there is a holy book that does explicitly mention trans people, that'd be great. But yeah, as far as I know, it doesn't. So often you end up in a situation where people are reacting to trans people as just like the same as gay people. And I know I just kind of said, oh, it's a bit like more of the same. It's more of the same in the way that a lot of people approach it. Usually their attitudes are very similar on the two subjects, but they are very different things. And certainly how religions deal with them. And I think often when you're talking to religious people, and if they like don't agree with trans people because of their religion, you could easily go down some kind of rabbit hole where you end up arguing about who created the universe or something, and all you really want them to do is just like respect your name and pronouns, and you don't need to prove whether there's a universe creator or all this kind of stuff. So what I often say is, to these people is, does it say anything explicitly like trans people are bad, you should not transition in the Bible? And they'll say, well, no, because that's true. And say, well, your God has created everyone with different challenges, and this is mine. And I always try and get in their little, like, before they can say it, I'll be like, but God doesn't make mistakes, right? So God's obviously chosen me to be trans. And that does seem to work on, more liberal Christians, at least that I've encountered quite a lot of the time. But if not, then I'll, argue about the existence of the universe with them if I have to. But so I guess when it comes to religion, it's often not the main, like the actual law of the religion, the things written in the books isn't the driving force for homophobia or transphobia. It's usually used as an excuse. It's used as, well, I don't really like this, so I'm going to find a bit in my holy book which justifies it, and then I'm going to say I can't change my mind because God says. I think that's the same with all of these rational prejudices. The prejudice exists first, and then you look for the justification. Yeah, sorry.
Can I, if I could just clarify? So it sounds like you're saying that when it boils down to it, it comes down to an argument from ick, which is to say ridiculous, in my opinion. No, I really appreciate what you're saying. I just, I feel like being raised fundamentally, like fundamentalist Christian, there was so much, even as a white male, that I felt like I was doing wrong, that I could never measure up to, blah, blah, blah. And I couldn't imagine what it must be like, to be, whether the Bible says it or not, treated as if the Bible says that it's, an abomination or whatever the hell somebody wants to try to, like put on somebody else. But no, I really do appreciate your explanation. That's, thank you. Thank you very much.
No probs. If you want to get more of an understanding of, like, so I did grow up thinking that trans people were disgusting abominations, basically. So if you want to find out more about that, I have a video on my channel called I'm Trans and I Used to Be Transphobic. If you're interested. MD, do you have any thing you could add on this? I know this isn't necessarily the ultimate call for you, but did you have a take, as a cis man, how you've encountered, if you encountered LGBT phobia from, your position in religion or anything?
I mean, maybe the best thing that I can do to comment on this is just to say that we get trained on LGBTQ and specifically dealing with trans patients and how we need to change our approach for trans patients, because there is obviously this huge abuse and a lot of struggles that are very unique to trans people. And so we have to take a very special approach. And I don't know, for me, I really don't, maybe it's because I've been out of the religion for so long, but I don't understand the problem, frankly. I don't understand how people have problems with it. Because to me,
I would agree at this point, but sorry.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's naive. I know it's naive, but to me, trans rights are human rights, and if you're going to grant human rights, then that extends to everyone. So I don't see why people are drawing distinctions between them necessarily. I understand why for the purposes of discourse, it happens. But
The purposes of
from a
discourse.
logical, well, because people want to have conversations specifically about this, but from a logical sort of perspective, for me, I don't think that there's a logical distinction between trans rights or gay rights or any other rights. I think that it's human rights.
I think that I don't think you could possibly sum it up in a way that I could understand it better. I really appreciate that. I mean, frankly, I don't think anybody trans shops for groceries or trans parks their car. That's ridiculousess. So thank you for that. Wow. Puts it in perspective. You guys have got plenty of callers, I'm sure. One last question, and I can even hang up and listen later. The only thing that I have is I've seen pronouns she, they, he, they. I'm not sure what that means, and I just want to understand. They, them would make sense, but he, they, she, they, I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, I hear
and
you.
I just curiosity.
Yeah, that's cool. So if you do want to ask, like super trans specific questions in future, I'm sorry to the ACA, but I do have another show which is called the Transatlantic Call-In Show, which you're welcome to call in and ask any trans questions. But also, just on this quickly before we move on to another caller, when you see two pronouns, you might see he/they or she/they or something, and sometimes you can see he/she/they, and it's just kind of saying I'm okay with all these pronouns. So if you want to call me they, them, that's cool, and if you want to call me she, her, that's cool. And I think that's usually how people use it. So, pick one and stick with it if that's how it works for you, but they're just letting you know they're cool with all of them. So anyway, thank you very much, Logical Apostate, for calling in.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to you again. So before we move on to the next call, which I think is going to be a lot more, it's going to be the other way around. So it's going to be much more for you. Oh gosh, sorry, Poppy's all tangled up with my headphones. Poppy.
Classic cat behavior.
Oh. She managed to get the headphones around her neck like a noose. Like, come on, Poppy. Goodness sake. Now it's going to be cat fluff stuck all over my face. Ugh. Right, anyway, before we move on, I'd just like to say below the live chat, we actually have a fundraiser, which raising money for the ACA. And on that one, 100% of the profits go to, or 100% of the money donated goes to the ACA, which means that YouTube doesn't get to take a cut. It doesn't get to take its little sneaky 30% off the top. You're not paying some Silicon Valley fat cat. It's going straight to the ACA, which is great. And we also now have a channel which houses all of the ACA shows in podcast format, which is great. I've had quite a lot of people ask me about that because I think lots of people like to listen without watching. I mean, I don't know why you would want to miss out on our beautiful faces, but if that's what you need to do, if you're driving or whatever, then you can visit tiny.cc/AEN podcasts. And you can also become a part of the Talk Heathen community in our fan-run Facebook page, tiny.cc/FBTHG. And as you can see, we've updated these RTLs, these URLs with tiny.cc links. So hopefully they're easier for you to type now. So that should be cool. But yeah, let's move on. Let's go straight into another call. Yeah, this is going to be probably one that I'm not going to be able to have an opinion on. So this is from Ameet in New York, who wants to know what MD Aware's opinion on the alkaline diet is and how it affects cancer cells. So I don't know what that is. So perhaps maybe, Ameet, you can do a quick description first?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So my family's in India. We have a lot of misinformation that goes around on our on some of our texting things. And one of my medically trained relatives has put forward something called the alkaline diet as a way to treat cancer. Naturally, being a skeptic, I don't believe it. And she manages to, provide a couple of papers here and there, which, again, I don't think are from reputable sources, but I just wanted to, ask an expert, especially someone who, shoots lasers at cancer cells.
Sure. Can you describe the alkaline? I have a vague idea of what you're talking about, but what is your understanding of what the alkaline diet is and does?
Yeah. So I don't want to straw man, so I'm just using the words that my relative used. Mm-hmm. They said you eat foods that makes your body alkaline, which already like flips a switch in my brain saying, what? And because cancer cells can't survive in an alkaline environment, it kills the cancer cells.
Okay. So I think there's a couple of problems there. The first is your body pH is very tightly controlled, like extremely tightly controlled. You're usually between like 7.35 and 7.45 sort of thing. So I deal with patients sometimes who are critically ill, like critically ill. And it's a sign of like imminent demise if their pH drops below 7 or like rises above, sort of like rises up to 8. So like you really can't push your body's pH that far. Your body has got inbuilt mechanisms to manage that sort of thing. So your kidneys and your lungs are the main two organs that regulate your body's pH. And frankly, you will die if you push your body too much into either, towards the alkaline end or towards the acid end. The other thing is this thing like alkaline kills cancer cells. I mean, maybe, probably, sure. If you get like sufficiently high pH, yeah, sure. Alkaline will kill cancer cells. Yeah, exactly. Like I'd like to know what studies they're pointing to and how they, and like what their models are. Because remember, like if anyone ever tells you, to paraphrase an XKCD comic, like whenever someone says blank kills cancer cells in a petri dish, remember, so do bullets, right? Like there's a lot of things that can kill cancer. And the trick when we're talking about cancer medicines is finding out how to kill the cancer cells without killing everything else. And I think that's the biggest problem. So first of all, I don't think that any alkaline diet, any normal alkaline diet can significantly alter your body's pH. And second, I think if you did, you might kill the cancer cells, but you would probably kill yourself in doing so. So I do not buy into this alkaline diet, I guess. I think you're right to have your skeptical alarm bells going off.
It definitely sets mine off too. I think when anyone says, I've got this diet that cures a medical condition, I mean, for sure, diets do affect your health and stuff. And I'm sure that having the right diet, if you are diagnosed with cancer, is probably kind of important. You certainly don't want, a terrible diet that's going to make your entire body struggle to function normally. If you just ate crisps or chips or whatever you call them there, for weeks when you had cancer, that's not going to make it better. But if anyone starts saying this diet cures cancer, I just feel like, seems like if a diet cured cancer, then we might have discovered it in the last 1,000 years rather than in 2021. But it's for sure, it's always worth investigating these things. But also, I'd just like to say on what MD Aware said about in a petri dish, that's always suspicious. I saw a study recently that was saying about aspartame causes cancer or something, and then they found out that in a petri dish, it with a clump of cells, it stimulated something or other. Yeah, but it turns out that aspartame breaks down. I can't remember which part. It's like it causes gut cancer or something, and it breaks down in your stomach, so it never actually gets to your gut. So although the study's a useful experiment of like human knowledge and furthers our knowledge about what aspartame does, to draw the conclusion that it therefore causes cancer from this is ignoring how complicated the body is and how much is functioning. And if you're starting to say alkaline kills tumors, it's like, well, how is it going to get there? Yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of reiterating what he said. But yeah, so I think it's worth maybe looking at their studies and just being ready for their studies to just be super specific or just have some nonsense conclusion that isn't really supported by the data or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I've observed a lot, is that people often try to draw links, causal links between things that aren't necessarily causally related, right? So they will say like, oh, in a petri dish, we raise the pH to like 9 and all the cancer cells die. Therefore, alkaline cures cancer. It's like, well, sure, in one sense, but that's not a very like realistic thing to do medically, right? We're not going to be able to, cure cancer with that knowledge necessarily. You need a couple more steps before you can draw some better conclusions. So there's always like a hidden little inference or something smuggled in, I find, whenever you get those sort of arguments.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
Which brings me to a little bit of a meta question, which is, this relative of mine is medically trained, and she's putting out this information to other family members who may or may not develop an illness in the future. I'm an engineer. I'm no medical expert. I'm not even like tangentially related to the medical field. How do I put down this information? They're going to trust this person because, one, they're a relative, and two, they're somewhat trained.
That's a tricky one. So I think that you should really interrogate this relative and see, are they saying these things? Are they believing these things based on their training, or are they basing it on something else, right? So I think a lot of people have a certain level of cognitive dissonance. They want to believe something and they might have training in it, but they're just not engaging that part of their brain, the medically trained part of their brain, when they're evaluating this, right? And I think we see that a lot with religious people. And so I think that that's probably what's going on here. So I don't know if there's a way that you can have a conversation with them and see if they can try to justify it in a more scientific way, because I think a lot of this stuff is a little bit wishful thinking. That's just my opinion. But when it comes to other relatives believing this person because they're medically trained, I mean, I don't know how to approach that. That's really tricky. Katie?
I think maybe you can... people are more likely to trust someone they know, their friend or the person who lives down the street, than they are some faceless expert. And I think that's a difficulty of, we're seeing that with all the vaccine stuff at the moment, where people are taking this nonsense, untested medicines rather than taking like vaccines which have been approved internationally all around the world, because they just trust. It's a scary time and you just trust someone, and so they say it and you just take their word for it. That said, people can be won over by showing them the evidence sometimes, at least some people, and I think it's worth trying. And if some doctors, I think people can often have a lot of trust for doctors, but some doctors believe all kinds of garbage. They believe in all these pseudoscience cures, or they're homophobic, or they believe in religion or whatever. There's loads of different. Just because someone's a doctor, it doesn't mean they have a nonsense view. And I think that it's worth maybe finding a collection of other doctors who are also experts who say otherwise. Then we can say, for sure, you trust Auntie and her position. And I'm not saying that she is poorly trained. She is an expert. However, her view is against the medical consensus here. And I can show you that because here is 10 papers that say otherwise. Here is 10 doctors that say otherwise. And hopefully that will make people think, without you trying to ostracize her or completely crush her reputation, which might then cause them to start feeling that they need to pick a side. You can just be like, well, she is saying this and it's just very controversial, so I wouldn't necessarily pick that over what your actual doctor says, who has looked at your body and your case, because there are loads of different cancer treatments. Mm-hmm. And you could say like, oh, maybe that one could work in some situations, but what's important to do is listen to your doctor today, because they're the one who knows your body and your situation. But yeah, definitely, it's very difficult when you have someone who is an expert who is saying something garbage to get through to some people listening to them.
The other thing is, what kind of doctor is this relative of yours?
Oh yeah, that's a classic, isn't it? Are they a medical doctor or?
Yeah.
What kind of medical doctor?
No, they're a nurse. That's why I said medically trained, not a doctor.
Oh, okay. So what kind of medical professional are they?
A nurse.
Oh, a nurse. Okay, sorry.
Not sure what field exactly. Sorry.
Okay. So my question would be, like, we're in medicine, we're very trained to respect expertise, which is why, like, I would never dream of speaking with authority on, like, OB-GYN issues or urology issues or whatever, right? Clinically, I'm trained as an abdominal and gastrointestinal surgeon. So I feel somewhat confident in discussing those with some expertise, but I would never dream of, like, saying something that contradicts what a urologist might say about the, urinary tract, or like the treatment for bladder cancer or something like that, right? Unless you've developed a specific expertise in that. So I don't know, maybe, I mean, there's a bit of a counterculture I've found among certain nursing circles, where they're very sort of almost anti-intellectual. Again, some nursing circles. So it can be tricky, but I mean, if this was my relative, I might ask, like, what do the oncologists in your hospital think of that? What do the people who treat cancer think about that? Like, like those sort of questions, because then at least you get an idea that, or you bring up in their mind that they are, going against the majority opinion. Oh, it looks like the caller dropped.
Oh, okay. So looks like we've dropped the caller. So anyway, thank you very much, Ameet, for that question. It was it's an interesting and difficult discussion, and I think it's quite relevant now with the pandemic and stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have some theist callers coming up, and we do prioritize theist callers because that's what this show is all about. So we'll move on to them in a second, but first we've got some exciting things. Now, this is the spooky month, so there's some spooky stuff that's about to happen. So if you have a weak constitution, then feel free to mute and look away and think about a non-spooky month like August when you're on the beach or something, because we have an exciting thing coming up, which is a special of Truth Wanted. Which is like Truth Wanted is a great show, but you're not going to miss this special because it's going to be on Halloween, and it will air shortly after the Atheist Experience on October 31st, which is Halloween Day. So make sure you're like ready for this, and we just have a promo now. So if you're still here and you can take the spookiness of it, here is the promo for this amazing, exciting Truth Wanted show that you do not want to miss.
Hi everybody, Objectively Dan here from the ACA's very own Truth Wanted, and I am here at the Driscoll Hotel, Texas's supposedly most haunted hotel. And we are going to be doing a very special live event on October 31st, Halloween night, where we are going to be live streaming in the hotel's allegedly most haunted room.
Amazing. Mate, I'm so hyped to watch this. Oh, it's going to be really cool. I'm so jealous that I can't be there for this. I really wanted to, like, if it wasn't pandemic times, I would have tried to fly over to America to just be there for this, because that looks incredible. I feel like the wrong reaction to spooky things is to laugh, but I don't know if it's just who I am or if it's to do with being a skeptic or what, but generally ghosts make me laugh. Like I don't Of all of the horror films, like aliens freak me out. Whenever I watch horror films, it's aliens that makes me scared.
Yeah.
But when it's ghosts or demons or like, it just kind of makes me laugh because I just think it's nonsense. But anyway, I won't ramble on about that for the rest of the show. So just before we move on to our next caller, I'd just like to say, if you would like to continue the discussion with us after the show, you can come and talk to me and MD Aware and like have a chat and ask some questions. Then you can join our Discord, ACD, which is a fan-run Discord at tiny.cc/ACA Discord. We'd love to see you there and hit, you know, kind of ask a question about ghosts or something. Okay. And also make sure to check out the newest episode of the ACA show, which is the non-profits, which will air live at 3 p.m. Central, which is after the show today at tiny.cc/YTNP. So anyway, let's get on to our next caller, which is going to be Mike from Washington, who I think is a theist. And Mike, are you saying that the emergence of information had to come from somewhere? Is that your argument?
Yes.
Okay, would you like to elaborate?
Well, you guys have a gap, the naturalist atheists, you guys have a gap from chemicals to a living cell, a self-sustaining, self-replicating cell. So anyway, there's a certain amount of DNA
hang on a second.
required.
Mike, sorry, what do you is this what you're going to be discussing? The like kind of the creation of
abiogenesis?
Or was that just a general comment? I want to know how that ties into your information has to come from somewhere.
The information, to keep it simple, like one strand of DNA in a woman's fertilized egg, there's enough information there to construct in order and sequence 200 different types of cells into 37 trillion cells of an adult. And
can you define information, Mike? Can you define information, Mike?
Well, instructions.
No, information. You said information has to come from somewhere, and I just want to know what your definition of information is.
Well, how about this? What is it about DNA that what causes a fertilized egg becomes a human being if it isn't aborted or naturally or deliberately? What is it about that DNA what construct a 37 trillion cell adult? If that's not information.
Well, it's just chemical reactions.
Definition of information, though, is it? Yeah, so that is a kind of a deflection from the question here. I mean, in order, we could say, well, that is information. You're just pointing at an example of something you're calling information. In that case, it's like circular, because you're saying, well, this is information. So what is information?
Well, what is it? What is it about DNA? Is DNA required to assemble for a human being to become an adult?
Yes.
So I think the reason why the reason why we're drilling down on this information thing is because information is when humans understand data, understand patterns, and it's a thing used to communicate, and DNA isn't doing that. There's no understanding there. It's just a mechanism. It's just like cogs in a watch, or circuits, or just like the pattern that sand falls over itself. Grains of sand and settle into like a sand dune or something. It's just a result of the mechanisms and physical structures that are there. And for sure, they do stuff that's really interesting to us. But there's not someone who is communicating. Sorry?
No, what drives that then? What drives that? What caused that?
What drives what?
Yeah.
What drives? Just one strand. There's 3 billion base pairs in one strand of DNA, and every sugar molecule in that strand are completely left hand or right-handed. So that's just an accident.
I mean, at some level, it was happenstance, right? Like the chirality of the molecule at some point in our history was sort of incidental.
It's either, so when we're talking about, you know, life, it's either necessary for life to exist, and so then it's going to have some kind of or beneficial, and so it's going to have some kind of selective pressure for it, or it's just a coincidence and that's just how it turned out, or it doesn't do anything,
Well,
but
wait
it
a
doesn't cause any hindrance.
No, that's before life. You're talking about some natural selection. There is no natural selection prior to life.
But hang on,
Sure,
you were
there
talking
is.
about
There's a natural selective.
Hold it. No.
Mike,
Mike,
there are
this is our show,
natural.
come on.
There are natural selected. There's natural selection mechanisms that act on non-life things, right?
Yeah, natural selection is just maths. I mean, it can you can have it just happening in, you know, in numbers, purely and described in numbers.
The way it was originally understood by Darwin was in reference to living things, but non-living things can be subject to natural selection and similar mechanisms, right? Like, for instance, the formation of our solar system is a form of natural selection, right?
No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about what we can put in a laboratory. Well, if you want to talk about...
All right, let me answer your question then, Mike.
theory.
Your question was originally, how did DNA come about, and sort of like, how does that work, right?
But
Yeah,
Mike, you couldn't
information.
define information for
So,
us, so
all
we
right.
can't.
The
We can't.
DNA in our cells is not information in the same way that you're thinking about information. The DNA in our cells is chemicals that are naturally selected to be in a particular configuration. They are not interpreted. They are physical structures that are acting according to physical and chemical laws. And the consequences of their particular sequencing are the result of physical processes. There's nothing that's sort of like interpretive, the way that you would read a book. And, you know, like, say in a book, the letters don't have any inherent meaning. You have learned a way to interpret the letters and the words and things like that, and you therefore derive additional understanding or something from it. That is not something that exists in DNA, because DNA was not created by a mind. That is something that people who study DNA and genetics and medicine have put onto it so that we can better understand it and study it, right? It's like we talk about like certain genes and certain gene mutations and stuff, but that's only because it's practical to do so, and because we need to do so in order to understand how things work. But it's not like built into nature. There's like a label. This is the cystic fibrosis gene. This is the gene for like blue eyes. It's just physical processes.
Yeah. I think that lots of people often think of DNA as a bit like a recipe, and it's like a chef reading a recipe and getting getting information from this. It requires 4 eggs, and so then when I whip them together, that's the process I have to do, and then we result in like an omelette or something. And that is the wrong way to think about this. And I think sometimes people will talk about DNA being a code, and I think to a lot of people they might just see a code and a recipe as the same way. But to like an electronic engineer like myself, a computer chip that is just running some software, we're imagining it as like software and like written out a recipe and stuff, but it's actually the same. There's actually just like a big machine here, and the machine happens to be running electrons for it, but it's just like mechanical processes that just happen. You can make a computer just out of a load of cogs, and you can just like crank a handle and it just like, a marble drops through or whatever, and it makes a decision. And it's the same with like DNA stuff. You've just got physical processes that are interacting with each other. And it's just like when we have this chemical and when we have this chemical and they're in the same place, they bind together because that's just the result of these chemicals. And I understand why it can be difficult to perhaps conceptualize that. But I think it's if you come in and just say DNA is information, and then we say, well, what's your definition of information where that makes sense? And then we don't really have one. It just seems like kind of just a claim out of nowhere. How do you respond to that, Mike?
What's that?
How do you respond to what MD and I were just saying?
You back that up to the basic elements. Then there's 118 commonly, straightforward elements, not counting the isotopes, the ME. Okay, 4 elements make up 96% of all living things: hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen. Okay,
because they're the most abundant ones.
Hold it here. How many? What other process would it be out of 118 different elements? Did it take? What process was there? Trial and error, or was there a natural selection to get to
what? To select for like these 4 elements?
I mean, they're the ones that stars create because
they're the most abundant. There's more of them, and so there was more of them around to like be made into stuff to react.
Also, because they're smaller, they're more stable.
But
lots
the
of the bigger elements
into the 20.
Stable.
But there's no brain behind this, according to you.
Correct.
Those 4 particular out of 118. How did it come? Did those come to form the amino acids? Now, I'm not even talking about lipids, the nucleic acids, and the carbohydrates.
I think the MD
just get to the 20. Just hold it a second. Just to get to the 20 particular and distinct amino acids. What natural selection function there? You'd have to go all the way up past.
Mike, I think we're trying to answer. So what your
hang on, pause for a second, Mike. Yeah. Is your question about atoms or is it about amino acids? Because you've been switching a bit, or is it about DNA?
1 second. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Oh man, you guys are pathetic.
Mike, come on. You've called in and you've said your original claim was information has to have come somewhere, and I thought this was going to be a really interesting, conversation about how we understand information. But instead, you've just claimed that DNA is information, and when we've pointed out that isn't really the case, you haven't been able to provide a definition of information, and now you're trying to talk about amino acids and elements. And MD's asked a really quite sensible question here to say, well, what is the actual question? Like, what are you asking? Are you asking why these elements show up most commonly in living things? And the answer is what he's already said, which is, they're the most abundant and they're the most stable, and so they're the ones we have around. Or is the question how did amino acids first start forming? Which is a different question to why they're made up from these elements. And I don't really see why these elements are the most common is even interesting. Because, so what? If you're saying that some intelligent thing created the universe, and it's I'm going to have 118 elements for some reason, even though most of them I don't really have a use for, and then I'm going to make life out of 4 of them for some reason. Well, mostly life out of 4. Why even have elements? What's the point? What there's just this completely nonsense thing, and why even have all this information communicate that you're claiming that there is? It just
I think that this is sort of what I was talking about earlier. Is there's a connection, I think, Mike, that you're making. You're saying there's 4 most abundant elements in our body. There's 20 amino acids that are used in our body. There's ATCG, whatever, these properties of DNA, and therefore God. And what I think we're missing is all the stuff in between that gets us from why is it relevant that there's only 4 elements to get to God? That's the sort of stuff that we're missing. We need to fill in that gap.
So, Mike, I would, if you want to address that position, I'm just about to unmute you. So that would be cool. But I don't think you need to be calling people pathetic. You're the one who's called in, who seems to be dodging questions and not providing definitions. So Here is your chance. Here is your chance to resurrect this conversation. Mike?
Yeah. Okay. What method to get I backed up to the 118 elements is how they specifically came together to form the 20 specific chiral amino acids. You're saying there's some kind of a mechanism there that's natural selection? How it's just odds. There's no feedback like a living thing. And
So I think, all right, maybe this will help. There's selection that occurs on a chemical level when it comes to replication, right? So again, it's been like a minute since I was reading up on abiogenesis, but most scientists who study origins think that chemicals developed the properties of being self-replicating at some point, and that was sort of where this stuff came from. And self-replicating arrangements of molecules or arrangements of atoms would obviously become more abundant than non-self-replicating arrangements of atoms, because they're self-replicating, right? Like, it's an inherent property. So if a chemical or anything really has the property of being self-replicating and nothing else in the environment does, eventually that thing is going to become more abundant in that environment. Does that make sense,
that's natural
Mike?
selection.
Yeah, exactly. That's a form of natural selection.
It's just maths.
Yeah, but how do you get to the self-replicating cell like RNA or DNA?
So
How do you get to there first?
We're trying to, the point is with all of this stuff is there are loads of very slow steps. Obviously we don't go from the local star creates hydrogen and then pow, we've got like humans. There is billions of years here involved. So I'm just saying that when we, MD's just pointed out that one of the first steps here that we can highlight as being interesting is when we get chemicals which can self-replicate, which is that's quite a cool thing. It's, it's an interesting thing to look out for and see happening. And that doesn't mean we're saying the next step is cells or the next step is cells recreating themselves. It's that when we've got some chemicals that can self-replicate and some others that don't, then we're going to have more of that chemical. And then when there are more than one different type of chemical that can self-replicate, then they may well be competing for various components in that. Or they might be competing for space, or they might, combine in different ways when they meet each other. And then there ends up being a really interesting and complicated process of loads of different chemicals doing loads of different stuff all at the same time. We're not just suddenly saying... Sorry, go ahead.
Name one chemical that self-replicates.
DNA.
But it's not water. But it's not a chemical itself.
Sure, it is. DNA is a chemical.
Deoxyribonucleic acid.
Yeah, deoxyribonucleic acid.
Sorry,
that's a chemical. Well, what do you think a chemical is, Mike? What's your definition of a chemical?
Self.
What?
Well, it's the elements. It's a combination of molecules.
Everything's a combination of elements.
A chemical can be a distinctive pile of atoms, just like copper or like carbon, hydrogen.
So sorry, Mike. Can you
water is a chemical,
right? I agree. So you're saying a chemical has to be a simple molecule?
Yeah, that arrange itself into that particular pattern that is like DNA. It's not just it's a specific range, specifically ranged. So what you're saying is, if you manage to make a DNA molecule, it's going to automatically self-replicate
under the correct environmental conditions.
Yeah, which is the same for anything. It needs the right conditions.
But what is it going to self-replicate from? What's its source?
That's what we need by the right conditions. It needs some of the components required for DNA.
Well, it's the same as saying humans are self-replicating, right? Humans are self-replicating. Well, I mean, you need two. So maybe, all right, let's pick an asexual reproducing thing like a bacteria. A bacterium is self-replicating, but you can't put a bacterium in a vacuum and expect it to self-replicate, right?
Yeah.
You need to give it the raw materials.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's the same with chemical, like any self-replicating chemical.
But a bacterium, a live self-replicating bacterium, is not just a couple chemicals. It's a whole bunch of range of things.
Yeah, but what's the difference? So like you can put, so okay, do you know how we do testing for COVID, the PCR test? That is a method of rapidly replicating DNA. Right? That's how we test for COVID. We do it in a test tube where this is, I was talking about earlier how I worked in the plant genetics lab. That was my thesis, was working on getting this DNA to self-replicate, and you have to get it in the right conditions, the right temperature for the right period of time. You have to give it all the building blocks, and then it'll self-replicate. But it's just chemical processes. There's no like magic. You just have to give it the right environmental conditions.
You're ignoring the human influence and the laboratory itself.
Yeah, sure, but again, we can grow bacteria. So a laboratory is just a way of controlling the environmental conditions. And usually what we're trying to do is replicate on a smaller scale what occurs in nature.
You're using terms trying, just like the Miller-Urey experiment, to form amino acids to prove that they amino acids form naturally. How is an enclosed glass apparatus with a trap, how is that anything like a natural condition?
Well, the idea is that you create a lab which replicates some natural conditions. You want to, if we want to be able to see if we can create the starting conditions for these kind of things, we say, well, what conditions can we do it in? We can make a lab and we can create these conditions, and we've created this thing. And now we can say, could this condition have ever arisen on Earth at any point? And if the answer is no, then we know that that isn't the way that it worked. But we might be able to say, well, now we've got it working under these conditions, we can try and find some similar conditions, which are conditions that we've had on Earth. And that's the point of doing these experiments. And then when we have a situation where we're like, wow, we've created the conditions, that once was on Earth, and we've got these chemicals which are self-replicating, then we've shown that it's possible. That's the argument here.
You can't make in a laboratory a full set of the 20 particular distinct amino acids.
We can't yet.
And that they won't form into a protein. And you can't go the other way by stripping amino acids out of animal and.
Okay, Mike, I have a question. Before you go on, I just want to ask: do you mean that we can't, or that we haven't yet?
You can't.
How do you know that?
Yeah, are you saying it's impossible? It's
because
theoretically impossible?
Well, just like I know that scientists build an airplane, right? Science builds airplanes.
Yeah, and one time someone said it's impossible to fly, and now we can. So I think it's ridiculous to say that it can never happen. I feel like we're a little bit going around in circles here, Mike. It's an interesting discussion, but I think that maybe we could move on, because we do have quite a lot of other callers, and perhaps maybe you could do some research on self-replicating chemicals. I did actually just have a look, and there was some researchers in the Netherlands who found a chemical which can reproduce, and it's benzenes, and it's like a ring of hydrocarbons with sulfur involved, and it self-replicates, and that's just a chemical. It's not an amino acid, although that an amino acid is a chemical. It's not DNA, which is also a chemical, but it's maybe something you will respect as a chemical under your definition. It's just a bunch of, I don't know, you won't be able to see on there in it. It's just like a bunch of hydrogen and carbon and stuff, and that can self-replicate. So perhaps go and look up, what chemicals can self-replicate, and call in another time. Perhaps you can continue the discussion then. But we do have some more callers, and we'd like to get to those. But I would just like to say the ACA does actually have lots of different shows. I mean, obviously, this is the best one because it's the one with MD and I on it. But there are some other ones that, you might want to catch up on if you want more of this kind of thing. So there's like the non-profits, there's secular sexuality, which I always have to brace myself to say. There's Truth Wanted, and you definitely need to check out the Truth Wanted episode that we were just discussing on Halloween, so that's going to be great. And there's also the Atheist Experience, which, some people have heard of. But if you didn't catch all of those shows this week, here's the taste of the things that you've missed out on and you should go and catch up on.
I had this dream that there was golden feces coming from the sky, taking a on his dad's church.
Hi, it's good to be on.
Thank you for calling. What do you got for us today?
Well, I have a story about time travel and how I time traveled myself.
Is there a DeLorean involved? Oh, hey, Jesus, do you forgive me? Yeah, you're good. You're square. That doesn't make you square with the person that you've wronged.
Yeah, or with mortal law. Like, great, you earned your way back into heaven. Super duper for you.
1 million subs by the end of the day. We can do this, you guys, for the nonprofits.
I will dress like Dr. Evil. If we get to 1 million subs, I'll shave my head bald. And
oh my God.
And I'll come in and do the 1 million subs thing.
I can do this all day long. You ain't got no power and your God ain't got no power. I ain't afraid your God could give me a hangnail. Why can't you answer a simple question? What good would it do for you to read scripture?
Man, I love all of those little clips that you guys managed to pull out. Like golden feces shower, what the fuck? And I'm glad that there was a time travel discussion. I love time travel discussion. Next time I'm on, someone call in with time travel.
That was a fun one. I was on that one. That was fun.
Oh, amazing. That must be great. I should go back and watch it then. That sounds really good. So before we move on to the next call, I think we're just going to announce the top 5 patrons of the week. So if you would like to become a patron and would like to maybe be on this list, you can go to tiny.cc/PatreonTH and donate, which could help the ACA quite a lot. So our top 5 patrons this week, from bottom to top, is Paul Lear, Balaam's Donkey, Dinglebury Jackson, CJ Dennis, and Eric Tweet. So thank you very much to all of them. And also an honorary mention to the Great North American Dingaloo. So anyway, let's move on to another caller. So we do have another theist caller here. So let's talk to Ron in Canada. And Ron would like to talk about the truth of the Bible. So go for it, Ron.
Yes. Well, thank you for taking my call.
No problem.
Yeah, I just want to say that I believe the Bible is true, and that the values in the Bible have shaped Western civilization and made Western civilization what it is today.
I think
if it wasn't for
So, sorry to cut you off. I think it's it's interesting to talk about the history of Western civilization. I think it's undeniable that Christianity has had an influence on the West, but also just on the world. It's an idea like Islam has had an influence on the entire world, and to say something has shaped the world, that's arguably true. I mean, you could say that I've had some influence on the world and have shaped it to some degree. But what I think is more interesting to me, and maybe to MD, we'll see, is your starting claim, which is, I believe the Bible is true. I mean, what, regardless of whether, Christianity has to some degree shaped the world, but in my opinion, not because it's true. Islam has shaped the world, and that doesn't mean that it's true or right or good. And I would say the same is for Christianity. So what has convinced you? What has made you think that the Bible is entirely true or largely true?
No, the Bible is entirely true. I mean, if I were to drop one part of the Bible and call the one part of the Bible silly or wrong, then I would have to call all parts of the Bible wrong.
Yeah, so that's a good step. I agree with you on that. So what has convinced you that the Bible is true?
Well, I believe that the Bible contains basically an ancient technology that's a wisdom that has revolutionized Western civilization and made
For sure, but like, so the Quran
gospel.
contains
Yeah.
information that has, shaped, like,
Well, I say
the areas in
Western
which
civilization
Islam is
specifically.
the East, perhaps. So that has wisdom, and that doesn't make that true, right? Surely you don't believe that like the Quran is true or that Buddhism is true, or so there's got to be something special about the
that's
Bible.
Right. That's right. Just because it was influential doesn't make it right necessarily.
Yeah.
I agree with you, but I feel that it was influential for the positive. I think it changed the Western civilization value system. Speaking specifically, the Judeo-Christian value system.
Right, but why
Christianity both?
I know. I'm just trying to steer you back onto this truth claim. For sure, I'll just totally agree with you. Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, they've all shaped the West, and so they've arguably done some good stuff, and they've arguably done some bad stuff. That's cool. Maybe even you think Christianity is the best of those. But why is it true? Why are you convinced? What is your reasoning? You open the Bible and you're like, wow, this is true. Or why did you open the Bible in the first place?
Right.
What has convinced you that it's true?
Right. Well, until I opened the Bible and started reading it with the right scholarship behind me, only then did I learn its accurate truth, that it was accurate and intelligent. When I initially picked it up, I read it on my own and I misinterpreted everything and I didn't understand it. So I believe it's true. I believe it's true because I believe God gave and revealed himself at Mount Sinai.
Okay, but Ron, you're not quite answering the question that Katie's been asking, right? So we're asking, why do you believe the Bible's true? And then you said, I believe the Bible's true because I believe God, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to hear like another belief claim. I want to hear what specifically convinced you that what the Bible is reporting is accurate.
Right. That's fair. You're right. Well, I believe that the Bible is so great, that the wisdom contained within the Bible is so great that it could not have been man-made. I don't have proof, like I would find in a laboratory, that was definitively created or inspired by God, but I would say that it has to be.
So this is actually a common argument I've seen from Muslims, and they often say that the Quran is so great, like it just cannot have been written by a human, or even that it can only have been written by a God. And so if a Muslim comes up to me and they're like, well, the Quran is true because it is so well written that it has to have been written by God, and you come up to me and you're like, well, the Bible is true because it's so well written, it has to be written by God. I'm now stuck in a position where even if I think, well, actually a human could have written the Bible and I think a human could have written the Quran, we can go into that argument next. But I think the first step is what you said, you don't have maybe proof that it's so difficult that only a God could have written it or something, or inspired it, or whatever your position on this is. How am I separating you and as a Christian and a Muslim both telling me the same claim?
A number of ways.
Okay, why is the Bible more impressive or truer, or?
Well, let me explain.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
The Bible is impressive and inspired so many people because it could not have been made by humans alone. It does not seem to me that humans would have made the Bible alone. History and civilization, all civilizations up to that point, all created their own religions. So there are many examples of what human-created religions looked like. Human-created religions were human-based. They had human gods were of human qualities. They had human feelings. Jesus, I'm saying preceding the gods, the God of Sinai, the gods. I'm saying that the people, I'm creating the context of why I think that the God of Sinai rebelled.
So Ron, do you I'm sorry to cut you off.
Yes.
I just want to make a point. So you're saying you're sort of listing things that distinguish Christianity from other religions, right?
Well, I'm speaking of Judeo-Christian values. I'm not
Right,
defending
sure.
Christian.
My point is, I think that it's kind of arbitrary to say, oh, well, Christianity is true because it was the first one that had, human or whatever, a non-human type God. It's like, well, that's kind of an arbitrary thing, right? Like, why is that? What we're really looking for, I think, is something that is like, this could only point to a God. This could only point to the fact that this is divinely inspired. So what's the property of Christianity or property of the Bible that makes it impossible for this to be human created?
Well, it's very unlikely. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but very unlikely that it was human created because, like I said,
so let's pick up on that. Is it less? Is the likelihood that the Bible was written by humans, is that less likely than like the existence of a God? Like, you have to compare these two things, right? It's like if your alternatives we're positing a supernatural entity that no one has ever been able to like provide definitive evidence for, versus a book being written by humans, a very wise book, perhaps.
That is
It is a false dichotomy.
Because, like, if I found a book, if I found something, and I was like, "Wow, there's absolutely no way humans made this," my first thought would, as I've already said in the show, be aliens. Because they're like, "Oh, this must be met some mad aliens somewhere." So, we could say.
I don't.
We would need, so on top of what MD was just saying, we would need not just to prove that humans couldn't have done this, and it's likely, we could say, oh, it's very difficult for them to have made this, but we've got to show that something else is more likely, but also then that it wasn't just something else we don't understand. It doesn't get us to God.
Well, okay. Well, I believe that there are 100, I would say 1,000 reasons why I believe that the Bible is true. Because and
What's your top
all
one?
those little reasons are embedded within the Bible itself. For example, why would the Bible, the 5 books of the Bible, why would they begin? Why would the first book begin not about people or about a specific people?
I mean, there are lots of books that don't start about people, though, right?
But also, why does that matter? Like, who cares?
Yeah, why?
How does that point to a God?
Yeah. Because it's non-chauvinistic and it points to a very behavior. Because humans want to start, all the gods that preceded the God of Sinai were very much glorification of humans. I mean, they had gods that were human and humans that were gods.
It's Genesis, right? That says God made humans in his own image. So that's just... Yeah, so now we've got humans that are godlike, right? Because they're made in his image.
You're asking me, yes.
Yeah, so I mean that reads the same. I don't see how this points to a God. Like again, I'm looking for some property that specifically points to a God without any of this inferential, compared to other things at the time, like... It's very wishy-washy to me.
Other things at the time. Well, it's very. I don't think it's wishy-washy. I think humans have a certain way of behaving, and when a book is created that is entirely not natural for a human to create, then it raises questions. Why would a human create a book that is so unheroic of itself? It did not happen in history.
I'm not convinced of that claim at all. I'm sure there are loads of other books that do that. I mean...
Well, there are not. I mean, we have a lot of examples of gods in the past. Every god prior to the God of Sinai were men who were natural nature gods.
So, Ron, I know you've mentioned this Judeo-Christian thing, which I actually wanted to pick up on, but I think maybe it's relevant here. If, the start of the Bible is shared between Christianity and Judaism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you think that everything in the Bible is true, but the Bible is actually different to, all of the books that the Jewish people consider true. And their religion also starts in the same way. So if we want to say the first religion, if your criteria for a religion, a holy text being true, full of it, all of it is true, is that it was the first one written where it starts talking about God rather than humans, then that's Judaism. That isn't Christianity. And you can say Judeo-Christian, but these two religions are mutually exclusive. Only one of them can be true. And they contradict each other. And if Christianity is true, then it can't be just that it was the first one that had, talking about God, because that was, I would be very surprised if Judaism was the first, but at least Judaism was before it.
I don't think Judaism and Christianity are mutually exclusive. I think they are entwined.
One of them claims that Jesus was a god, and the other one says he wasn't.
But those are questions of theology. Those are not.
That's kind of a key factor in Christianity. Like that's the Bible says very explicitly, right, that Jesus is the Son of God or is God or however. I mean, it definitely makes a claim that the Jewish faith does not agree with. And if Christianity is true, then Judaism cannot be true. Sure, they could have a 90% overlap. I mean, I'm not sure what percentage of the Jewish faith is contained in the books in the Bible, but it's certainly not all of. It's not like Christianity is a superset of Judaism. They're like an overlapping Venn diagram, and they both make claims that can only be true if the other religion is false.
No, that's not true. They are overlapping Venn diagrams. Christianity is based on the integrity of Judaism. That's true, but the value systems are identical.
But we're not talking about value systems necessarily, right?
We're talking about the truth of the Bible,
yeah,
or the truth of the Jewish holy text.
Okay. Yes. Well, I think.
And if the Bible is true, then Judaism is false. Like if everything in the Bible is true, if every single aspect of the Bible is true, which is a claim you made earlier, then there is the claim that Jesus is the Son of God, and the Jewish faith disagrees with that, and that's like a core component of Judaism. And there are other claims in the Bible.
It is. You're right. You're right. That is a core component of Judaism. You're right about. But that's
so they are mutually exclusive.
Question. And that doesn't matter. The authorship of the Bible is not what binds us together. It's value.
Okay. No, it's the truth. It's the truth of the Bible.
We have a common God.
Okay,
with
Ron.
Value.
It's not the same.
I think
God.
we're getting a bit far afield, because I'm still looking for a good reason to believe that the Bible is true.
Yeah. And the one excuse so far has been because it's the first to talk about a god rather than humans, and I actually think that's Judaism. So let's maybe pick a different claim that's actually true.
Well, I mean, I would say that there are 1,001 claims in the Old Testament that leads to the veracity of its truth. I mean, why would
does that mean that the reason that the Bible is true is because the Bible is claiming to be true, though? I mean, there are lots of books that claim to be true. And there are lots of books with truth in them.
Based on my ability. Yes, there are lots of books with truth in it. Yes, but it seemed very unhuman to be making the claims that it did about a certain people. If that people, the Jews, were responsible for writing that book, and it was not God, they would have made a very different book.
How do you know?
Likely made a book. Because I know what human history has shown.
But you know what was going on in the minds of ancient Jews.
Yes, we do. We have lots of.
I'm not convinced I do know that.
Ron, I don't know what's going on in your mind, and you're a fellow Canadian living in 2021. So I don't know how you could possibly think that you would know what's going on in the mind of Jews like 6,000 years ago.
Well, we have written records. There's written there are cuneiform.
Sure, and I consider the Bible to be one of those written records. Do you deny that the Bible was written by a human, physically written by a human?
Yes, I do. I believe it was written by a human, many humans, inspired by God.
Okay, so we know. So all we really know is that Jewish people wrote, say, Genesis. And also, they wrote other stuff, right? I don't see how a God fits into this.
They wrote it.
And I'm really not convinced.
They wrote it, but they didn't inspire.
So how do you know that it was inspired? I think, like, I don't know. What do you think, Katie? Like, I think we've sort of drilled down to the issue, but I don't know that we have time to go into this in huge detail.
I'm just thinking that
I don't think you're accepting my answers. I don't think you're accepting my answers.
It's not necessarily. It's not that we're not listening to your answers. I think that we are unconvinced by your answers. I mean, I feel like, you know, the claim of the Bible is true, and you know, if I wanted to say, you know, this paper that MD has just written is true, for shooting lasers at cancer cells or whatever, then we can look at the evidence, and he's going to provide some evidence in the paper. And for sure, you know, the paper is like its own truth claim, but it's providing, here is the evidence that we can look up, and here is the conclusion, and we can discuss that about whether the evidence supports that conclusion and stuff. And if, you know, if I say, well, why is the Bible true, fully true? To show that the Bible is partially true, we can say, well, the Bible claims that, you know, the sun comes up in the morning or something or whatever, and we can go and see that there's evidence for that. But to claim the whole Bible is true, we need some kind of evidence to show that this whole book is true. We could go through all of the claims in the Bible and provide evidence for them individually, and maybe that would be, we could then come to the conclusion that the Bible is fully true because we've evidenced every single claim. But I feel like that's not the position here. It's more that the Bible is giving us, you know, it itself is evidence. It's true because of a reason. And I'm saying, well, what's this reason? And you've said there's lots of different reasons, and maybe, you know, we need to provide lots of them. But the first one you provided was, well, humans are very arrogant and they like to write books about themselves, and this one isn't, and it's the first one, but I actually don't think it is the first one. So I think the issue here is, like, you know, that isn't convincing evidence for me. Even if the Bible was the first book ever written where it didn't talk about humans, and I was like, wow, this is so out of character of humans, because humans are stupid and arrogant as shit, and they love writing about themselves. And in this book, they've written about God first. Like, wow, that's interesting. That is historically significant. I wouldn't see that as evidence for God at all. I mean, personally, that doesn't even arguably convince me. I'm just like, this is just the first one that's done it. I mean, for example,
it doesn't even register as being supportive of the claim to me.
Yeah, I think it's just, I mean, it's potentially an interesting fact, but, like, you know, someone was the first person to play a guitar with distortion, and that doesn't mean that God did it. It's just really cool, and it's just, everyone was like, wow, that's a really good idea, so I'm going to copy that. Yeah.
I mean,
anyway,
it goes on. That's one reason. Well, okay. I mean, there are 1,000 examples of that in the Bible that show that it's not something that a man or humans would have produced.
I think you have to work on, Ron. You have to work on finding evidence that directly points, not just through inference or anything like that. Right? Not just, I don't think this is what humans would have produced. You have to find something that directly points to a God did it, right? Like Katie said, maybe it was aliens. We don't know. You have to find something that points directly to the cause that you're proposing.
So I'm sorry to cut you off, Ron. I just want to say, like, you know, this is an interesting topic. I think we might have to, we would like to squeeze in one more call, so I think we're going to have to move on. But perhaps next time, if you could come up with, like, your top 5 you know, best pieces of evidence or something like that as to why you think it could only be written by God, that'd be great, because it's like that's the kind of thing we want in this show, is like, here is my evidence, and then we can discuss the evidence. And we're not convinced by God being the first thing talked about. So there is still 1,000 pieces of evidence that you can come with, sort out like the top 10 or something, and call back in. But thanks very much for your call, and it was a good discussion. We have a very limited amount of time, and we're just going to try and get in the lightning round. And I just thought this call looked really interesting, so we're just going to talk to oh, hang on, wait a second, sorry, I clicked the wrong button. We're just going to talk to this is a little bit laggy, come on, please do it. I'm very sorry. Right, okay. We're going to talk to Alison, who grew up in a cult and now an atheist, and would like to ask a question. We're really sorry we don't have much time for your call, but I thought this looked like a really interesting topic. Would you like to just say your point, and then perhaps we'll just give our views very quickly?
Yes, that's great. Thank you. So I was raised in a cult and I considered myself an atheist for a long time. I guess my question would be, why use the label atheist? Because I considered myself that for a while, but I started to feel like that itself was also limiting. So I guess that's my question, is just why use the label atheist at all?
Right. Do you want to go first, MD?
Sure. I mean, I think labels like this are mostly for communication purposes. So people have a general idea of what atheist means. A lot of the times it's not exactly in line with what we think, right? But I think that it generally communicates what I believe, and sort of the label exists, so I use it. I kind of like, I think it's objectively Dan calls himself an igtheist. I kind of like that, because I also agree that there's not a lot of great, like now I'm at the point where if someone says, do you believe in God? I say, well, what do you even mean by that? Like, I don't really know what you mean.
Right.
And so I don't know that there's a sensible thing. But if I go around saying igtheist, that's not going to mean much to a lot of people. So I guess the short answer is I use the label because it's there and it roughly describes what I believe. And that's just easier than having an extended conversation with someone who's just making pleasant conversation, maybe.
I think the answer that, I kind of have two parts to my answer to this. The first is that, I mean, an atheist, this is like the atheist experience answer. Atheist just means I'm not convinced by any God claims, and that's just literally true for me. If someone wants to come up and tell me about a God and then they can convince me of it, I'll no longer be an atheist, just by definition. And so if someone says to me, do you believe in God? I'm like, no. And that is like the definition of an atheist.
Right.
But I think MD's made some interesting points. Oh, I guess I'll just add to that doesn't restrict me. That doesn't mean I don't believe in other things. I know in your call notes it mentions spirituality. There are atheists who are spiritual, whatever that means to them. I'm not. But there are atheists who believe in magic and who believe in aliens and who believe in atheists can believe literally anything apart from in a God, because then they're definitionally no longer atheists. But the other part to my answer, just quickly, hopefully we'll just cram this in and then we'll hear what you have to say, Alison. But I often say that I think there are two reasons why I care about. Oh, we've got another. Oh, it's a dog. Yay. Sorry. There are two reasons why I care about labels, and that is because descriptions are interesting to humans. We like to communicate. We need words to describe things. I think you get this kind of it's like the music genre problem. We could give every single music genre, like we could get every single band, every single song a new genre, but then that'd be pointless because you would need a billion different words. Or we could just have one big genre like rock, which has a third of all human music and kind of means nothing. But so we need these words to have a certain level of descriptive ability to just communicate topics, so we're discussing them, and that's interesting for the purpose of categorizing things and telling people about, just for nice conversation or whatever. This is kind of interesting. The other reason I care about labels, and I think the main reason, is when I'm trying to address injustice in society, and so this is why I care about labeling someone as like LGBT, but also as an atheist. Atheists, whatever that means to whatever people are in power, get oppressed all over the world for their position as an atheist. And in some places it's illegal to be an atheist. Some people are killed to be an atheist, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they are someone who doesn't accept the God claim, and that is the sole problem here. It could be that they are perceived as an atheist and they were like, actually, well, I do believe in God, I just believe in a collection of gods, or I just believe in my own personal God. Or they'll be like, no, you're an atheist, like you're going to jail, or we're going to execute you. And equally, you could be an atheist, but you're like, I don't really think this label is very good for me, but technically I do not believe in God, so I'm an ichtheist, like objectively Dan is. But they're not going to care about that. They do not care about the specifications. The point is here that the term atheist, as we generally understand it, is something that a lot of people don't like. And I think that it's good to have that word to describe that, because it's essential for then addressing this bullshit. I mean, like, people should be able to believe whatever the fuck they want, back off. And it's important to address this garbage. For sure, the struggle for atheist rights and stuff, and atheism in general, will often involve separating church from state and all this kind of things. But some of it is directly addressing prejudice against people for their beliefs. And so I think that's why it's important, and that's why I use atheist, and that's why I do this stuff. because I'm very privileged as far as atheists go in the world, in that I live in a country that doesn't care that I'm an atheist. No one around me cares. Absolutely no one I bump into in the world in my day-to-day life gives a shit. And in some places, I would have to be silent about that. So I just want to, someone might say, oh, I'm an atheist. I'm not a fan of the atheist label. And I'm like, well, okay, that's cool for description purposes. But when I'm in front of 1,000 people watching, some of which live in countries, or some of which are people who believe that atheists are bad, I want to be like, hey, mate, I'm an atheist. Fuck you. Like, deal with it. Anyway, how do you feel to that, Alison? I know that we've just spammed out loads of lightning fast things there, and we're...
No, it's okay. I think that's incredible. I'd love to call back another time to hear more, just because I always agree with what you guys say, but then I still just have a problem. Maybe because I was raised in a cult and there's still something in my mind that has trouble with the word atheist, but I do feel sometimes like just the label atheist is distracting, or even limiting, because I do now, I left as a teenager, but now I'm 40 and I do have a lot of different beliefs and a lot of different things. And I agree with the exact same thing that you said. Everyone should believe whatever the fuck they want to believe. So I guess that's where sometimes I just have an issue with the label. But I think that is really interesting. I'm going to have to go back and watch it again, because you said so much that I didn't.
Yeah, I did spam out a lot of stuff there. I guess I would just like to, in the spirit of these call-in shows, just before we move on. So, thanks, Alison, and definitely, call back and have a discussion maybe with some other hosts and see why they use the term atheist. That'd be interesting. Right. I guess just like to clarify, my believe whatever the fuck you want. And that's true. Like, you should be allowed to legally, and like, that's fine. But if you believe something that is like logically inconsistent or offensive, or not offensive, offensive to me because it's logically inconsistent, harmful. But like harmful or dangerous, or even encourages you to harm yourself or something like that, then just don't. But call into the show and we'll talk you out there, and it's all good. But yeah, definitely law-wise, people should be able to believe whatever. But anyway, so thank you very much, Alison, and thank you to everyone for this show so far. We've had some amazing calls, and we crammed in a last one there, and I think it was really good. It was a nice change of pace from the previous call. So just to remind everyone that we have lots of different ways to support this show, and that's how we can do this. It's how we can have these shows, and everyone can watch them at home and have fun times, getting angry at the TV or whatever you're watching this on. So if you would like to support us, just remember that below the chat we have a fundraiser, and 100% of the proceeds from that go directly to the ACA, so no sneaky YouTube cut. And you can also, just below the chat, there's the join button, which allows you to, on the next show, you'll be able to spam as much nonsense in the chat as you like and show off with some flashy stickers and all that kind of stuff. So that would be great if you'd like to do that. You can support us on Patreon at tiny.cc/Patreon-TH. Patreon's great because it gives, creators and groups like the ACA a lot of freedom, a lot more so than like random donations. But, random donations are great too. But, we really appreciate Patreon. Definitely check out the podcasts. I think podcasts are a really great way of catching up with things, especially when like driving or cooking. So if you want to listen to any of the ACA shows on podcast, then visit tiny.cc/AEN podcasts. And you can also, if you'd like to carry on, these discussions yourself, as well as doing it in the live chat, which is very fun, and leaving comments, you can also become part of the Talk Heathen community at our fan-run Facebook page at tiny.cc/FBTHG, or you can come to the ACD, which is the ACA run fan Discord, and me and MD are going to be on there for half an hour or 20 minutes or something after this show, and you can come and have a chat and hang out, and that's a fun place to be. And then lastly, make sure you check out the non-profits, and definitely leave a comment asking for them to have me and MD, of course, on the show, because that'll be fun. I'm trying to peer pressure them into having me on at the moment, and that's at tiny.cc/YTNP. So now one of the last things we'd like to say is thank you so much to the crew and the staff here who are amazing. I'd love to see you, crew, if we can get some crew cam. Maybe we can get some.
Yeah.
Do we have any crew cam cats this week? Yes, we do. Yay, that's always the best bit. So lots of love to all of the crew. Thank you. Like, this show wouldn't be possible without them. And so talking of love, we would love to send out love rings to everyone watching, to the crew. So this is the special part of Talk Heathen where we do our little love rings. So lots of love to everyone in the audience and everyone who's joining in. So final note to our viewers is whether you believe or not, you know, this is the show that you can watch and you can come and hang out with us. And if you don't believe, this is like your community. You know, we appreciate you joining in. Come hang out with us. It's amazing. And if you don't believe, you know, you can come and join in too. You know, we don't hate you here. We love to talk to you, you know, central part of our show. We don't hate you. We are just not convinced. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you so much, MD Aware, for coming on the show. And we'll see you all soon.
We want the truth, so watch Truth Wanted live Fridays at 7 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTW and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/calltw.